A village by the sea. Fishing boats, cottages and a gorgeous view. A perfect place to escape from a busy world. But look a bit closer and there's a different story.
I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist I want to explore the places where we live to see how they've changed and hopefully dig out the odd surprise about their past.
Our coastal villages are often seen as remote outposts, places of retreat and relaxation, but they've been on the front line of history, from the arrival of Christianity to desperate battles with neighbours and nature, from slave trading to the birth of modern tourism.
Lindisfarne is also known as Holy Island, and that's because for 900 years this was a cradle of Christianity, a centre of religious learning, home to saints. It's a story of two communities, religious and secular, who since Anglo-Saxon times have lived together in this village by the sea.
More than 500,000 visitors are drawn to this Northumberland coastal village each year. With its cafes, village store and gift shops, there's lots to see and do, but many are enticed by its remarkable history.
The island village of Lindisfarne is just a handful of streets, but it was at the heart of a cultural revolution that changed Britain and produced one of our greatest national treasures. From the Anglo-Saxons to the Tudors, Lindisfarne had a fame and reputation far greater than its size suggests.
These ruins hint at a past of enormous wealth and power that began in 635 AD when Oswald, the mighty king of Northumbria, invited monks to build one of the first monasteries in England. From here they spread Christianity across the north. Up on the headland, archaeologists have uncovered what could be one of the earliest stone churches ever built in Britain.
We don't have a precise date, but it's certainly very early, almost certainly the earliest ecclesiastical structure found to date on the island.
For archaeologist Richard Carlton, the clues are in the crude way the stone has been worked.
Forgive me, it doesn't look a very polished building. It looks a little bit rough and ready.
Well, it is, yes, both in the method of construction, but particularly in the dressing of the stones, the way they've been prepared. It's got various signs of pecking, and it seems to suggest that a large number of people, possibly fairly inexperienced people, were having a go at stonemasonry rather than a sort of specialist team of professionals.
That's intriguing because it's up here in this exposed position, the wind's whipping in today. Surely you'd want to be down there in the shelter of this hill, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, part of the early monastery was down in the bottom, and the later monastery, as you can see, was down there, and that's a great place if you want to be sort of cosy and sheltered, especially in the middle of winter. But if you want to actually signal your intent to be here for a long time and to essentially show off, you would position yourself on top of this hill where you can be seen for miles around into Scotland, onto the English mainland and to the south. And in particular, looking over the sea there, just a couple of miles over there at Bamburgh Castle.
The Lindisfarne monks were within sight of their lord and master. From his royal palace at Bamburgh, King Oswald ruled over the vast Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria.
It's a quiet, sleepy coastal village now, but it was the centre of things then.
Graham Young and his team have spent 20 years digging deep into Bamburgh's past, a glimpse into the brutal world the monks had been asked to join.
We're talking about a great kingdom, which is actually a fairly substantial chunk of Britain. and it would have extended all the way south to the Humber and up to the Firth of Forth. Northumbria was the top kingdom. It was a real northern powerhouse.
The finds point to a busy cosmopolitan society. Analysis of human remains show a population drawn from as far away as Scandinavia, and their bones reveal they led the high life.
They're just as tall as modern humans. They're very strong, they're feasting, they're eating well. I think they're drinking an awful lot of mead, and it's having a terrible effect on their teeth. Our specialist, Sarah Groves, who looked at them, says it was the worst teeth she'd ever seen in an early medieval population.
And it was a society that produced delicate works of the most intricate detail.
You're getting these beautiful artefacts here. We've got the famous Bambra Beast, which is this 7th century gold plaque. We actually have some later gold artefacts as well. So there's 200, 300 years of what seems to be high status industry.
But it was a kingdom ruled with an iron fist and the sharpest of swords.
This is a militaristic society, isn't it? I mean,
It is. There's definitely an element of something more sinister, much more Game of Thrones. But I also liken them to mafia bosses. You've got the guy at the top with his made men, and they're in that position because they're armed and they have a great capacity for violence when they need to.
The monks wisely chose to site the monastery away from the royal palace and its threat of violence, across the water on Lindisfarne.
this is Aidan, 1st Bishop of Lindisfarne. But he'd have only chosen this as his base if he was confident that it had the resources necessary for his monks to survive and thrive.
The sea itself would have been a rich source of food, just as it has been for generations of villagers.
We're getting good catches of undersized crabs and lobsters. Obviously, the fishing we do is good because everything that's small goes over the side again, and it's there to breed and to get bigger for another day for the next generation. There are 6 boats here now.
So that's quite a sizable fleet then?
Yeah, it's a good size of fleet.
After one of his fruitful early morning fishing trips, I managed to catch Richard Ward on dry land, where upturned hulls are reminders of what was once the village's biggest industry.
These are remnants of the old herring fleet that was based here at one time. Obviously now they're just used for storage and for maintenance, but obviously there was a good herring fishing on the island many years ago.
These were obviously big boats, and there's a lot of them, and that implies the fishing was big.
Yeah, there's certainly a big fleet here. I'm not sure how many there were on the island itself, but certainly I've seen old photographs from Eyemouth where you could walk from one side of the harbour to the other without getting your feet wet, from deck to deck to deck, and boat to boat to boat.
So in Aidan's day, the monks will have been well provided for by the sea.
Oh, certainly. The sea was a massive bounty for them. They'll be able to eat fish not just a Friday, but every other day of the week if they wanted.
The land, too, is bountiful. The villages are tightly tucked into one corner of Holy Island, but it stretches out to 3.5 square miles, and it's out in the fields you'll find farmer Alison Brigham. As well as tending livestock, she grows lots of produce.
Oh, there's some good sized ones coming out now, yeah.
They're lovely.
So I was roped in to gather the latest crop.
My dad's family, we've been here since 1754, I think.
Oh, a fair while
Yeah.
then.
I'm the 4th generation on the farm.
And is it good soil?
Very good soil. We've got really lovely, fertile, sandy soil. I grow carrots, beetroot, peas, potatoes, tomatoes, strawberries, raspberries.
All sorts.
Yeah. I've got a little fruit and veg stall just beside the car park.
Villagers can have some visitors coming in, can take some of Holy Island away with them.
They
Yeah.
can.
Most people who come to Holy Island think, oh, it's sand, it's rock, it's sea, it's the village, nothing else.
Yes, they don't realise sometimes there's so many people even live here.
Yeah.
Well, there's a school, and there's not just one working farm, there's 2.
Do you think the monks would have appreciated the qualities of the land here?
How could they not? I'm sure they did. They would have people to feed in this. It's lovely soil. How could they not use it?
So what you're doing now is what they were doing over 1,000 years ago?
Just the same. Yeah, just the same.
The monks and villagers would have shared the fruits of the land and sea, but they lived apart. Early monasteries were often surrounded by a physical perimeter, a ditch and a bank.
We've got no conclusive proof of where that dividing line was, but it would have made sense to use features in the landscape. And I'm up here on a rocky outcrop that the locals call the Hoof. And down there, that meandering scarp is actually the old shoreline. And it's on this corner where those two natural features meet.
The rest of the boundary would have been man-made, and it seems likely we'll find it in the modern village, as road layouts often follow ancient patterns.
I'm standing at the junction of the village's two longest streets. This one, Marygate, goes right down to the old shoreline, and this one goes down to the Hoof. It's the opposite corner of that perfect monastic boundary.
From their island base, the monks travelled far and wide, spreading Christianity. Their founders, King Oswald and Aidan, became saints. At low tide, you can walk straight across the sands. Pilgrims Margaret, Sue, Ninette and Francis are among the hundreds of people who make that crossing each year.
I've been doing this route over Easter every year since I was 12, so 20 plus years now. And it's just part of my Easter tradition. It's part of my pilgrimage every year to come to the island and spend some quiet and peaceful time here.
And what are you thinking about as you're walking?
Sometimes, ow, this hurts.
Try not to get caught in the quicksand.
I love it when the water comes in and you're just on this beautiful, peace, quiet island.
Sue, what does this walk mean to you?
Walking in the footsteps of the saints, it takes you back into the history. And there's something as well about, particularly about Holy Island, that you can't quite put your finger on. That just, it's absolutely magical. It's about making a space in your life, in a busy life.
People have been doing this pilgrimage across, following these poles for generations now, and just being able to walk across, listening to the seals singing in the distance, the crabs nibbling on your feet. it's fabulous.
Holy Island is the cradle of Christianity in the north, and we're following in the footsteps of the saints who brought it here. We even call ourselves Northern Cross to remind ourselves that it's about the cross in the north.
Also following in Aidan's footsteps was another bishop who would become the most famous of Holy Island's saints. Cuthbert was credited with performing many miracles. So holy, even otters were said to come out of the sea to pay homage at his feet. After his death in 687 AD, people travelled from far and wide to seek out his shrine and offer gifts. The monastery grew in wealth and status. It was a golden age which produced one of our greatest national treasures, the Lindisfarne Gospels, which have pride of place in the British Library.
Here on the island there's a facsimile, and even this copy has to be handled very carefully. These sumptuous illustrations and the text were probably the work of a single monk and would have taken many years. But this book also tells us so much about Lindisfarne's place in the world and the people living on the island.
Professor Richard Gamerson from Durham University has studied the pages and the pigments.
The whole range of colours in the Lindisfarne Gospels is pretty much represented on this table. A couple of them were produced locally. So for instance here, this is indigo from woad, and the pigment here is indican. Others were made locally,
So these two here, they're both lead pigments. This is called orpiment, that's short for auripigmentum, a gold-looking pigment, and that mineral at the time in question could only be acquired from Spain or Italy.
So if I wanted to go, I could just start mixing these with a bit of water, a bit of gum, and away I'd go.
Well, it's more complicated than that. You would be taking your life in your hands. Now, we all know that lead is a cruel poison that builds up in the body, so you really have to know what you're doing to make those. But don't worry, that won't be the first one to kill you. This is the one that will. This is arsenic, pretty pure arsenic. So breathing that in, that's going to kill you.
The inks prove the monks had connections well beyond their shores and were experts in chemistry, but they also needed the perfect pages for the Gospels. They're made of vellum, calf skin.
You can see the spine running down the skin as it ran down the animal. Where it was underfed or its bones rubbed against the skin, that leaves into imperfections. And the skin in the Lindisfarne Gospels is almost flawless. Only 8 pages have a hole or an imperfection. And in order to get that degree of perfection for a manuscript, you would be rejecting 9 out of 10 of the available skins.
So that's about 1,000 calves then?
Yep.
A cluster of ruined buildings at the other end of the island point to a time when Lindisfarne was producing religious manuscripts on an industrial scale.
Maybe a little bit difficult to appreciate now, but I'm walking into the very rare remains of an Anglo-Saxon stone-built farmstead. This is one of the buildings here. There's a line of masonry, a parallel wall there, and the end wall there. But what really excited archaeologists was the amount of cattle bones found here. Not just any cattle, but calves. This was a veritable factory for vellum production.
Unusually, those living on the island around this time left us clues about their identity. In this part of Northumberland, they commemorated the dead with inscribed name stones.
These are names of people that would otherwise have been lost to history. They're all part of what made this place tick at the time.
Susan Harrison from English Heritage looks after this very special collection.
They're in miniature, so they're not gravestones as we know them, but they may have been laid directly over graves. Yeah. They may have been possibly placed in a grave, or perhaps in a chapel. These are our only record of these people with these names at this time.
One in particular stands out.
Let me show you this one.
I can make out the detail, I can make out the early Anglo-Saxon alphabet and what looks like an O and maybe an S down here, but I can't read who this is.
It's really difficult to read, isn't it? The name is that of Osgith.
Osgith.
And Osgith is a feminine name. So this is our only stone from the collection of 16 of them found here that gives a feminine name.
Now that is very interesting. So we either have a nun, and this is a double house, a double monastery with female community, or this is a secular person, a citizen.
Yeah, we don't know who she was. It's tantalising. The only record of her is through this stone.
The hollowed out centre may once have held a gem or jewel, and microscopic traces of paint reveal it was once as brightly coloured as the Lindisfarne Gospels. Holy Island had become a European epicentre of learning, art and religion.
But on the 8th of June, 793, all that changed.
The Vikings came. For these local primary kids, this isn't just a fun lesson. They're learning about their history. The Viking raid on Lindisfarne shook the island, the Anglo-Saxon world and Christianity to the core.
Viking raids repeatedly targeted the treasures found in monasteries, and eventually the monks here at Lindisfarne had had enough. They moved to the mainland and they took their most prized possession with them, the body of St Cuthbert.
But the island was not completely abandoned. Villagers who survived the Viking attacks depicted those dark days in stone.
Quite obviously, there was someone left here to commemorate that day, a craftsman and someone commissioning this piece of work.
Absolutely, and it's not just this that's the only evidence, there's all of the other worked stone that continues right the way through to the 10th century that shows that a community carried on living here.
During those turbulent centuries, the Lindisfarne monks stayed away and kept Cuthbert's remains safe. Eventually, they built a new home for their saint. Durham Cathedral, a monument of breathtaking grandeur. All this for a humble monk from a little island off the Northumberland coast. But the Durham monks wanted to keep a link with Cuthbert's origins. So in the 1100s, they returned to Lindisfarne to build a new monastery with a magnificent priory church.
And you can see it in the architecture, these columns, these piers, the chevron design. This is a direct copy from the cathedral at Durham. And unusually, the monks built the church here before they'd built any other monastic buildings. Often it's the other way round, but it was really important to the monks that Lindisfarne became a holy island once more.
The returning monks would also bring a new sense of order to the village.
Right outside the gates of the priory here is the village green. But this to me looks like the classic medieval marketplace. It's a rectangular area, there are streets leading from the corners. Now, as landowners, it would have been the monks who shaped this village and who shaped the lives of its inhabitants.
Cheek by jowl with the priory, the monks built a separate church for the village community, which is still in use today, although much has changed.
25 years ago, the Anglican Church for the first time admitted women, and I was actually one of the first to be ordained as a priest.
The Reverend Kate Tristram is also a historian. She believes the Durham monks would have relied much more on the villagers than in Aidan's day.
The second monastery was quite a tiny community. We think at the very, very most 10 monks or thereabouts. The local people did at least some of the work of the monastery. And that would have been a village of ordinary Anglo-Saxon people, many of them, no doubt, fishermen, because that was always the obvious way of making a living here.
Records show the monks were in charge of village life. They bought the boats and the nets.
These days, Lindisfarne crab and lobster are exported as far afield as Asia. And back in their day, the monks were no less ambitious. They would send their fish and oysters to Durham, but also seals and even dolphins.
But life in northern England was rarely peaceful, and soon the village would face another threat. Constant border conflict with the Scots would leave it vulnerable to attack. The House of God needed an upgrade.
In the 14th century, defensive features were added, like these arrow loops here, so archers could shoot down on the marauding Scots. They added battlements, they added turrets and towers. The priory became like a fortress.
But it wasn't the Scots who would lead to the downfall of the priory. It was an English king, Henry VIII, who took control of the church and dissolved the monasteries. Once again, the villagers faced life without the monks. They made the most of what was left behind.
This is a lovely, characterful building, and this hodgepodge of building stone makes me deeply suspicious about where it's come from.
Sarah Nesbitt is the current owner.
Well, I was born here, but there's been 5 generations of the family in here.
5 generations?
Yes. Yeah. My grandfather was the postmaster and had to go to Beale to pick up the post.
And the house looks a little different. It's been rendered or coloured or whitewashed there. And now you've taken it off, I can see all the higgledy-piggledy stones here. I mean, there's limestones, there's sandstones, it's come from all over. But I suspect they've actually used stone from the priory here when the priory was disused and dissolved. And you can see where they've cut, roughly squared it and shaped it, but not for this house. Your ancestors took this stone, used the priory as a quarry and built a house. And you can see that going on all over the village.
Yes.
Today's island village is struggling to cope with a new type of invader.
Unlike the Vikings, they come not by sea, but by road.
A causeway was built across the sands back in the 1950s. Now, close to 700,000 visitors a year descend on a village of just 160 inhabitants. For the locals, it's a double-edged sword that's changing their community. More than half the houses are now second homes or holiday lets. But tourism brings in money. St Aidan's winery makes mead, the drink once enjoyed by monks and King Oswald's overindulgent royal court. Shane Wilson gave up fishing to become production manager, and he's foolishly let me help out.
Do you come from a family that's been on the island a long time as well?
We've been here since the early 1500s, our family.
Early 1500s?
Mm-hmm.
Good grief.
Probably even for longer before that.
I've broken your machine. Whole production. Right, hopefully that's stamping it all right. You have to tell me if it's not.
It'll be fine.
There we go. How many bottles are you producing a year?
4 different varieties. It's about 53,000 a year we do.
So is that based on a historical recipe, or are you having a guess?
I can't tell you that.
Is it a secret? Is it a state secret?
It's a big secret. Right, Ben, you've earned this.
Well, I don't know about that, but for quality assurance purposes, I think,
definitely.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Oh, that's cheeky, that, isn't it?
Nice.
St Aidan would have had no idea that 1,400 years on, he'd still be contributing to the village economy.
By capitalising on its past, this village by the sea is securing its future in a modern world. When the water inches its way back over the causeway, then, for a few hours at least, Holy Island is returned to the peace and isolation of ancient times.
The only thing that's remained truly unchanged since Aidan's time is living by the rhythm of the tides. This small village found itself at the heart of politics and of power, and it helped shape a nation's beliefs. It's little wonder that it still attracts visitors from far and wide and finds a special place in many people's hearts.